Welcome back, everyone. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it seems more important than ever to have this very important conversation. Of course, Naomi Judd's passing is making headlines today. She was very open about her struggles with mental health, but that is not always the case. So we're going to dive in this morning. Joining us to talk about how we can help, how we can check in with ourselves and those we love is psychiatrist and author Dr. Suvrat Bhargave, live and in person. I'm so happy to see you.
So good to be back, and so good to be back in the studio.
I know,
really
I know.
Good.
We Zoomed a couple of times all throughout the pandemic, and your advice always made me feel just so much better. And I do want to talk about Naomi Judd. And the minute I heard, I know Trent's a big fan, I was texting him. She was very open about sharing her struggles and detailing the type of treatment she went through and that she tried. But a lot of people don't. It's still kind of taboo. You would think that that wouldn't be the case after these 2 years. But why is it that people just aren't being as vocal as they should be?
Yeah, it was so sad, right? To wake up
Yes.
and to hear that. And she was someone who was so vocal, and I can only imagine how many lives she's touched, affected, and really saved and continues to save right now in her legacy.
Yeah.
But you never know what someone's going through on the inside, right? And especially if you're not talking about it, then you really don't know what someone is going through on the inside. And, you know, just to put it in perspective, Christine, there's probably 5% of the world adult population that's living with depression, and yet only 25% of those, a quarter of those, are actually getting appropriate treatment. And a lot of that just has to do with not having enough education about these things and the stigma that goes along with mental health as well. And again, she did talk about it, and I remember one of the things she said in one of her interviews was, this is not a character flaw, it's a disease of the brain. So we have to think of it that way.
Yes, exactly. And I want to kind of go to the basics here, sort of mental health 101, as we could say. We hear people talk about mental health and also mental illness. What kind of differentiate those two expressions for me?
Yeah, that's a great question, because mental health and mental illness are not the same thing, and yet they get used interchangeably, and what happens is you miss a lot of the warning signs. So mental health is a overall consideration of your social, psychological, and emotional well-being.
Got it.
Mental illness is a specific disorder that might affect your way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So think about it like your physical health and then a physical illness, right? You don't have to have diabetes as a diagnosis in order to start having regular checkups and making changes in your lifestyle.
Makes sense, right?
And same thing, you don't have to have a diagnosis of a mental illness. It's time to check in with yourself every day and make these changes now, today.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, we're going to talk about signs to look out for of poor mental health. For somebody watching out there, if they're experiencing any of these things or someone they love, then we definitely need to check in.
Yes, that's exactly right. And again, just to say this, we're all human, therefore we're all vulnerable to poor health. And what might be normal for you may be a red flag for me, right? So you kind of have to know yourself for sure. But there are some general signs to look for. And one of those is if you're having difficulty in your relationships, getting along with friends or family, that could be a sign of poor health, poor mental health. Another one is if you have a decline in your overall productivity, whether that's at home or at school, wherever you might find yourself being productive. Another one is if you have a loss of interest in activities or social situations, that might be a sign that you have poor mental health. Also, if you have generally just more stress in your life, if you know your stress level is really increasing, that can be a sign of poor health. And then finally, if you have low energy or lack of motivation, then that could be a sign of poor mental health as well. And again, mental illness symptoms would be specific to a diagnosis.
Sure.
But these are signs that it might be time to start making some changes in your life or reach out for some help.
Sure, sure. And we're so lucky. We talked about this actually earlier in the week or last week about being able to access so many different resources, whether that's a person, in person, or online, or books. I mean, all of it, medication, whatever's going to be best for you. And speaking of that, what is best when it comes to turning things around? You have tips for that as well.
I do. And the great thing about this is we can make these changes today.
Yeah.
It doesn't take any money, and it doesn't really even take a lot of time.
There we go.
And the
Love
first
that.
thing is what we're doing right now. Talk about your feelings. When you talk about what's going on internally, you already feel more supported and you feel less alone.
Right.
And who knows, you might even inspire the other person to talk about what they're going through as well.
Yes.
So talk about your feelings. Take breaks, whether it's 5 minutes to take really deep breaths or just the time that it takes to sit down and actually have lunch. When you put some me time into your day, it's like getting a recharge, right? So take some breaks, stay connected. Stay connected to friends, family. Like you said, Christine, there's so many ways to do that now, and it's so important to do that. So take the time to foster those relationships.
Yes.
So stay connected. My other one is just the opposite of that. Disconnect.
Yeah, right.
And of course,
that's
now,
okay too.
That's okay. And right now I'm talking about especially technology and all the
Right.
things that constantly keep your brain stimulated. None of us are going to be healthy if our brains are constantly stimulated
Right.
and getting tons of information to our brain all at once. So let's train our brains to know what it means to relax for a few
Yeah.
minutes at a time. And you'll see that that will certainly make a difference. So disconnect for sure. Another tip is do something you're good at. You know, when you're trying to manage stress, if you do something you enjoy, that will make a difference. And finally, care for other people.
Yeah.
Because when you do that, you take the pressure off yourself, put it on someone else, and you're making a difference for someone else as well.
So important. All great tips and advice. Thank you so much for checking in, as always.
Thank you.
Great to see you live back in the studio.
Here we
so
are. Here we
appreciate
go.
it.
Thank
Yes.
you. My mental health's better already.
Mine too. Thank you.